Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor.
Now, we do the very best that we can, quite honestly, to answer questions off our Facebook page here on the show itself, here on KPDX. Sometimes it's very difficult to get there, but today we got the time set up. So let's jump right to that first one that was sent in, I believe, just recently. It's the perfect timing for this question when you're referring to rod position. Ryan, go ahead and throw that up there. It's from Richard. He says, what are the advantages of having the rod tip close to the water while trolling salmon? Now, there's actually a couple of advantages to that. In particular, the number one way right now that, and it's pretty much year-round now, it seems like, is to run around with an Evolution plasher or something similar, a 360 plasher, right? So you got to have a rod that can handle relatively heavy lead from 12 to 20 ounces in most cases. If you're in shallow water, we fished all the way down to 5 ounces. It just depends on the situation that you're in. But 99% of the time, you're going to be using that heavier lead. So you're going to have a little bit of pull on that rod already, let alone with the pressure from that 360 down there. What it'll do, what the advantage is there, Richard, is that when you do get bit, with that rod tip down low, it's going to put that rod tip below where the reel seat is on the rod, right? So when it's in the rod holder, that rod tip should either be level with it or just slightly below. That gives the fish less opportunity to shake that hook on that initial bite. So when the fish does bite it, it's going to go right to the reel, right to the backbone of the rod, rather than being up high and letting the rod just kind of give, where that hook is not going to get turned to where it's going to get positioned right to get that fish in the mouth. So if the rod tip is down, and you don't want your rod tip in the water, all right? That's not where you want it to be, although sometimes depending on the lead and the way your setup is on your Folbies or whatever rod holders you're using, sometimes you'll get really, really close to it. It is what it is. But in the end, it gets that fish, your hookup ratio will go up. Now, you still gonna lose fish? Yeah. I mean, it just happens that way. Along with that, if you're the person running the boat, typically we're at the back or on the kicker, or at least close to it. If you've got an RK or not, you're somewhere back there. It's a little easier to see the rods by looking down than having to kind of look over and see the rod. So for me, at least, it's I'm much more confident that my rod is in a better position to actually hook the fish when it grabs, and then I can just see them a little bit better with them being a little bit lower. So there is an advantage. The key point that I would say there is that you need to make sure that your rod holders, again, are positioned the right way. If you're going to be using heavy leads, again, don't let that rod tip bury into the water. You're going to sometimes have to have a little bit of kick up. But if your rod tip is within, 8 inches to a foot of the water, that's pretty much where you want to keep it. And that's going to change, of course, based on shorter rods in the back. If you've got the 360 Pros, the 9.2s that are out the back, now the new 11.6s, which I set up this week. I can't wait to fish those. Or even if you go longer towards the front of the boat. If you can keep them all in that same relative zone, your hookup ratio will go up. And again, you can see them a little bit better. And I think in the end, it lets those rods just kind of, especially if they're designed for them, like the 360 Pros from Edge. Hello. They're designed specifically to let that rod whip, or excuse me, the flasher whip and get that kick in it. It is an advantage in the long run. So at the very least, Richard, I hope it helps out in some way. Now, the next one, steelhead. Steelhead fishing, it's a thing right now. Summer steelhead are certainly in most of the tributaries that they are supposed to be in, and it hasn't been horrible. It hasn't been, well, I shouldn't even say it that way. If you get a report as opposed to, you're not going to get 10 reports. It's a kind of a tight-lit fishery, but this is certainly a question that's relevant. We've talked about it a lot in the past. Let's take a shot with that Kershaw Tech Cam and give you an idea of just a handful of ways that you can rig. And the question was specific. Let's take a look at the question from the individual that sent that in. And this is Lane, was wanting more information on how to set beads above the hook. Do you use toothpicks, hold or wrap it on the line? So toothpicks, no. And certainly you can use toothpicks. People have used toothpicks for years, but I can say that it is not the best way to go because it does dent your leader. And in most cases, you're going to be using a fluorocarbon, which is a harder material than, say, monofilament. So if you use that toothpick, you are taking a little bit of a risk because you're already compressing that line. So I certainly don't do that. I did it originally back in the day for an easy way to do it, and I certainly do not do that now. So here's a couple of options, Lane. You mentioned wrapping. My preferred way to fish for steelhead with a bead is 9 out of 10 times with a hard bead, and we are wrapping these. I wrap it with a triple wrap. This is nothing new. It's been around since bead fishing started up in Alaska. I mean, we are so far behind the times when you're talking about bead fishing overall here in the Northwest. It's been going on a long time, but triple wrapping is very, very common in a lot of different areas. Some people aren't comfortable with it. I get that. I'm extremely comfortable with it, especially with good quality P-line. From 8 to 12 pound is what I'm using, and I simply don't have issues with it. But that's how I prefer to fish, so that's my #1 way. But if you're going to fish a soft bead, which is extremely effective, I do fish a lot of them. This year, I spent more time with soft beads than I have in a long time because Brandon convinced me and others that 20 mil, 16 mil, and believe it or not, even bigger, were so darn effective on winter steelhead that I've been rigging it up with that soft bead and then a triple wrapped bead below it, either a 4 mil or a 6 mil, depending on what size soft bead you're fishing. So you're just triple wrapping that small bead on there to stop your soft bead from sliding down to your hook, which is the biggest issue for me. It's one of the reasons why I don't fish soft beads as much as I did initially, because I hate the fact that they slide down to the hook. It drives me nuts. But there's different ways that you can do that. This one here is actually a loop knot. This is how Pro Escobedo showed us how to do it a little bit. We're got actually Pro in the studio tomorrow. This is a loop knot where that bead sits on top of the knot of the loop, and then that bead sits there, so you're not actually wrapping it. I do wrap it though, but that is another option. And here's another way you can do it with that loop knot with one of the T-stops from B&R Tackle. Most commonly used soft beads, although everyone seems to be making them now. An ingenious design by Brandon, as always. Works great, slides down the line, drives me bonkers, but with that loop knot and the knot up here, that T-stop stops right on top of it, so it is extremely effective. It is certainly something to consider. And then, of course, it's just using the bead stop, or excuse me, the T-stop itself from B&R right onto your main line, or excuse me, right onto your leader, and then thread on either your soft bead from B&R, which, by the way, already have a hole in it. You don't need to poke a hole in it like you do with this particular one here. And then slide it right on top of that T-stop. So there's a number of different ways that you can do it, Lane. You just got to pick the one that you like the most. But again, if I'm fishing a hard bead, it's triple wrapped. If I'm fishing a soft bead, I'm triple wrapping a small bead below it and letting that big bead, 16 and 20. It's crazy to look at, but they're, hey, look, you saw all my photos. I had a good year. But there you go, Lane. I hope that helps you out in some way. All right, let's go ahead and cut to a break. When we come back, we're going to have my good friend, Mr. Jack Glass from Team Hookup Guide Service. We're going to talk about springers, summer chinook, summer steelhead. What's he doing? Where's he been? And see, maybe there's a way that, well, you might get motivated to get out there and have some fun, too.
Outdoor GPS is brought to you by Yakima Bait, steeped in tradition, innovation, and fishing success. And by Procure Bait Sense, ruthlessly effective.